Ethan Carter had never imagined that one simple mistake could change his entire life. He was just a mid-level diplomat from Earth, sent to the Grand Palace of the Zilari Empire for what was supposed to be a routine negotiation. The mission was clear: establish peaceful relations and secure a trade agreement. But things did not go as planned. The Zilari were a proud and powerful alien species, known for their strength and discipline. They stood taller than humans, with shimmering silver skin and piercing golden eyes. Their culture was strict, their traditions deeply rooted in honor and respect. Ethan had studied their customs before the mission, but no amount of preparation could have saved him from what was about to happen. The grand hall of the palace was massive, its towering pillars carved with intricate symbols. Thousands of Zilari nobles had gathered to witness the diplomatic meeting. At the center of it all sat Queen Silara, the ruler of the empire. She was regal, her presence commanding absolute silence. Unlike the others, her eyes burned with an intensity that made Ethan uneasy. "Step forward, human," her voice echoed through the hall. Ethan moved cautiously, bowing his head slightly as a sign of respect. His interpreter, a fellow diplomat named Duran, whispered translations in his ear. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, until the ceremonial offering was brought forward. A silver goblet filled with a glowing blue liquid was placed before him. Duran had warned him about this. It was part of the tradition, a gesture of goodwill. Ethan lifted the goblet and drank, feeling the warmth spread through his body. The crowd murmured, nodding in approval. But then came the second part of the ritual, something no one had warned him about. An attendant presented a silk scarf, embroidered with the royal crest. Ethan glanced at Duran for guidance, but the interpreter was frozen in shock. The queen extended her hand, waiting for Ethan to take the scarf. Unsure of what else to do, he accepted it and tied it around his wrist. The crowd suddenly erupted into gasps and whispers. Duran's face turned pale. "Ethan, what did you do?" "I followed the tradition," Ethan said, confused. Duran swallowed hard. "You didn't just follow the tradition. You just completed a Zilari marriage ritual." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Wait. What?" Duran's voice was barely a whisper. "You just married Queen Xilara." Ethan turned back to the queen, hoping to see some kind of misunderstanding in her expression. But Xilara was staring at him with unreadable eyes. Slowly, she stood from her throne, her golden eyes locked onto him. "The human has accepted the bond," she declared. "By the laws of the empire, he is now my consort." The silence that followed was unbearable. The nobles looked stunned, some outraged, others amused. Ethan could barely process what had happened. He wanted to protest, to explain that it was a mistake, but the weight of the moment held him in place. A deep voice boomed from the side. "This is unacceptable." A massive Zilari general stepped forward, his armored form gleaming. "A mere human cannot be the queen's consort. This is an insult to our empire." Murmurs of agreement spread through the hall. Ethan could feel their eyes burning into him, some filled with disgust, others with curiosity. He was an outsider, a human among warriors and rulers. Queen Xilara raised a hand, silencing the room. She walked closer to Ethan, her presence overwhelming. "He has followed the sacred rites. Whether by ignorance or intent, he has fulfilled the bond. And I," she said, her voice cold and steady, "will honor it." Ethan's heart pounded. He had come here as a diplomat, hoping for a peaceful trade deal. Now he had somehow married the most powerful woman in the galaxy. He took a deep breath, realizing that his life had just changed forever. Ethan Carter sat in silence, his mind struggling to keep up with what had just happened. The grand hall was still buzzing with shocked whispers, the Zilari nobles exchanging glances, some amused, some furious. Queen Xilara stood tall beside him, her expression unreadable. She had just declared him her consort, and now there was no turning back. The laws of the Zilari Empire were strict. Once a royal bond was formed, It could not be undone without great dishonor. Jorin, the human diplomat who had accompanied Ethan, finally found his voice. He stepped forward hesitantly. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, choosing his words, "this is surely a misunderstanding." The human did not intend to. Tilara raised a hand, silencing him. "The bond has been sealed," she said firmly. "Intended or not, he is now part of the royal house." Ethan could feel the weight of 1,000 stares pressing down on him. His throat was dry. How had this happened? Just a few hours ago, he was a simple diplomat, hoping to negotiate a trade deal. Now he was apparently the husband of the most powerful ruler in this part of the galaxy. The massive general who had spoken earlier was still glaring at him. His armor gleamed under the palace lights, and his silver-skinned face was twisted in anger. "This is unacceptable," he growled. "A human cannot be our queen's consort. It weakens our empire. He should be removed at once." Several nobles nodded in agreement, their disapproval clear. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Removed. That sounded an awful lot like they were considering something more permanent than just sending him home. But before he could even think of a response, Queen Silara's gaze hardened. "You question my decision, General Varrock?" she asked, her voice cold. The general hesitated. I only mean to protect the Empire," he said, lowering his head slightly. Silara's golden eyes didn't leave him. "Then protect it by respecting its laws. The human followed our sacred rites. He is my consort now. If anyone challenges that, they challenge me." The tension in the hall was thick enough to cut with a blade. The nobles looked at one another, but no one dared to speak. It was clear now, whether they liked it or not, Queen Silara had made her decision. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He needed to say something, anything, to show that he wasn't completely lost in this situation. Your Majesty," he said awkwardly, "I just want to make sure we're on the same page here. I wasn't really expecting to, get married today." Silara turned to him, her expression as unreadable as ever. "And yet here you are." Ethan swallowed hard. "Right. Here I am." The queen studied him for a long moment before finally turning back to the court. "The meeting is over," she announced. "My consort, and I will retire to the royal chambers." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Royal chambers. That didn't sound good. Before he could protest, a group of armored guards stepped forward and gestured for him to follow. With no other option, he walked beside the queen, his mind racing. Inside the palace, the corridors of the palace were vast and elegant, lined with glowing symbols and towering pillars. Ethan had seen advanced alien architecture before, but this was something else entirely. It felt ancient and powerful. Silara led him into a private chamber, her personal quarters. The moment the doors shut, Ethan let out a long sigh and turned to face her. "Okay, Your Majesty, can we just talk for a second?" Silara removed her ceremonial cloak, revealing a sleek, battle-ready outfit underneath. She crossed her arms. "Speak." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "Look, I get that I messed up, but this was an accident. I didn't mean to, marry you." Silara arched an eyebrow. "And yet you drank from the sacred goblet and accepted the royal scarf." "Yeah, because no one told me those things meant marriage," Ethan said, exasperated. "I thought it was just some cultural formality." Silara was silent for a moment before stepping closer. "Human," she said, her tone softer but still firm, "I am the ruler of an empire. The laws we follow are absolute, whether you intended it or not. You are now my consort. If you refuse to accept this, you will not just dishonor me. You will dishonor the empire itself." Ethan swallowed. "And what happens if I dishonor the empire?" Silara's eyes darkened slightly. "Then the nobles will demand your removal." Ethan felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had seen how some of those nobles looked at him. Removal probably didn't mean a simple escort back to Earth. It likely meant something far worse. He let out a slow breath. "Okay," he said carefully. "So what happens now?" Scifi studied him again before turning away. "You will stay by my side, attend court meetings, and prove to my people that you are worthy of standing next to me." Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, I have to prove myself." Scifi glanced back at him. "Of course, unless you wish for the nobles to challenge your place." Ethan groaned. Fantastic. Just fantastic. He had arrived on this planet hoping for a peaceful trade deal. Now he was stuck in a political game he didn't understand, married to a queen who barely tolerated him, and surrounded by nobles who wanted him gone. His life had truly changed forever. Ethan barely slept that night. His new reality felt like a bad dream, but every time he opened his eyes, he was still inside the grand chamber of the Scifi palace, surrounded by alien technology and guarded by soldiers who didn't trust him. Morning came with a deep, echoing chime that shook the palace walls. Ethan sat up, groggy and confused. The moment he moved, the doors to his chamber slid open, and a tall, armored woman stepped inside. She had silver blue skin, the same as the queen, but her expression was far colder. "Get up, human," she said, her voice sharp. "The queen awaits." Ethan rubbed his face and sighed. "Good morning to you too," he muttered, standing up. The guard didn't respond. She simply turned and marched ahead, expecting him to follow. Ethan had no choice but to keep up as she led him through the palace corridors. The hallways were busy with activity. Scifi officials, warriors, and servants moving in perfect synchronization. Ethan felt completely out of place. Every alien gaze that landed on him carried either curiosity or disdain. Finally, they reached the royal court. The moment Ethan stepped inside, all eyes turned to him. Queen Scifi was already there, standing in her regal armor. Beside her was General Varrock, the massive warrior who had protested Ethan's marriage the day before. "Ah, the human arrives," Varrock sneered. "I was beginning to think he had fled." Ethan frowned. "Good to see you too, big guy." Scifi raised a hand, silencing the murmurs around them. "Ethan Carter, today will be your first trial as consort to the queen." Ethan blinked. "Trial?" Varrock grinned. "Yes, human. You wish to stand beside our queen. Then prove you are not a weak outsider." The nobles muttered in agreement. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "Great. Just what I needed, an alien test. What exactly do I have to do?" he asked cautiously. Scifi gestured toward the center of the court, where a large, circular platform had been set up. "You will face a challenger," she said. Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, you mean like a fight?" Varrock chuckled. "A simple duel. Nothing lethal, of course, unless you fail to defend yourself." Ethan turned to Scifi, hoping she'd call this off, but her expression remained firm. This was not a request. It was an order. "Fantastic," Ethan muttered under his breath. The duel begins. Ethan was led to the arena, where he was given a basic combat suit and a practice blade. His opponent was already waiting, a tall, muscular Scifi warrior named Scifi. The alien stood nearly 7 feet tall, his silver skin gleaming under the palace lights. Ethan swallowed hard. Yeah, this is totally fair. The crowd gathered around, whispering excitedly. Most of them probably expected the human to fail. Scifi raised her hand. "Begin." Scifi moved instantly. He was fast, too fast. Before Ethan could react, the warrior swung his blade, and Ethan barely dodged. "Ti-lang he." The sound of metal rang out as Ethan blocked the next strike. The force of it nearly knocked him over. "Too slow, human," Scifi mocked. Ethan gritted his teeth. If he fought this guy head-on, he'd lose. He needed to be smart. Instead of attacking directly, Ethan began dodging, stepping back just in time to avoid Scifi's powerful strikes. He studied the warrior's movements, searching for a weakness. Scifi lunged again. Ethan sidestepped at the last moment, making the alien stumble slightly. The crowd gasped. Ethan smirked. Gotcha. Instead of attacking with brute force, Ethan used his agility and strategy, forcing Sarek to waste energy. Every time the alien struck, Ethan moved just out of reach. Frustration began to show on the warrior's face. Fight me properly. Sarek growled. Ethan grinned. Why? This is working just fine. Silara watched carefully, her golden eyes analyzing Ethan's technique. He wasn't the strongest fighter, but he was smart. Sarek made a mistake. He overextended his swing. Ethan saw his opening. With a quick movement, Ethan ducked low and swept Sarek's leg. The alien lost his balance and fell hard onto his back. The court went silent. Ethan quickly pressed his practice blade to Sarek's chest. I think that's my win. The crowd erupted into whispers and gasps. Varrock looked furious. Sarek, still breathing hard, stared at Ethan in disbelief before finally nodding. You fight with your mind, not just strength. I respect that. Ethan stepped back and offered a hand. Sarek hesitated before taking it, pulling himself up. Queen Silara stepped forward. The human has proven himself. Ethan exhaled, relieved that he had survived. But then Silara added, the next trial will not be so easy. Ethan groaned. There's another one. Silara's lips curved slightly. Of course, my consort. This was only the beginning. Ethan barely had time to rest after his unexpected victory. As soon as the duel ended, Queen Silara ordered him to follow her. The next trial was already waiting. He walked beside her through the palace corridors, still catching his breath. His body ached from the fight, but his mind raced even faster. I thought that duel was my test, he muttered. Silara glanced at him, her golden eyes calm yet unreadable. That was only to prove you are not weak, but strength is not enough. Ethan frowned. Then what's next? She stopped in front of a massive door, guarded by 2 Zilari soldiers. The doors slid open, revealing a grand chamber filled with alien nobles. At the center of the room stood a prisoner, a Zilari man, his hands bound in glowing restraints. His silver-blue skin was covered in bruises, and his gaze was filled with defiance. Ethan's stomach tightened. Something about this felt wrong. Silara stepped forward. This man, Rethos, is a traitor. He conspired against the throne and endangered our people. The nobles murmured in agreement. Ethan looked at the prisoner, then back at Silara. And what do you want me to do? Varrock stepped forward, his deep voice filled with authority. Your next trial is simple, human. Prove your loyalty to the queen. Deliver the punishment. Ethan's eyes widened. Wait, you want me to hurt him? Varrock grinned. The punishment is a public strike, a show of authority. If you wish to stand at the queen's side, you must show your strength. Ethan glanced at Silara, hoping she'd call this off. But she remained silent, watching him closely. This was another test. He turned to Rethos. The Zilari prisoner stared back at him, unafraid. Was he really a traitor, or just someone who spoke against the queen? Ethan took a deep breath. He knew what they expected. But he wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a ruler. He was human. A different choice. Ethan walked up to the prisoner, standing only a few feet away. A guard handed him a thin metallic rod, the punishment tool. The nobles watched in silence. The tension in the air was heavy. Ethan held the rod for a moment, feeling its weight. Then, instead of striking Rethos, he threw the rod to the ground. Gasps filled the chamber. Varrock's eyes burned with anger. What are you doing, human? Ethan crossed his arms. I won't hurt an unarmed man just to prove something. Whispers spread through the crowd. Some looked shocked, others impressed. Varrock stepped forward, his massive frame towering over Ethan. This is not your world. Here, disobedience is met with punishment. Ethan didn't back down. Maybe that's your way. But if you want me to stand beside the queen, you have to accept who I am. Silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Silera smiled. "He has passed," she declared. Varrock stiffened. "But my queen." Silera raised a hand, silencing him. He did not show weakness. He showed wisdom. She turned to Ethan. "A ruler must know when to punish, but also when to show mercy. You made your choice, and you stood by it." Ethan exhaled, relieved. He had passed. Silera faced the nobles. "Let it be known that Ethan Carter is not only strong but also just." The nobles murmured among themselves. Some still doubted him, but others nodded in approval. Varrock scowled but said nothing. He couldn't argue against the queen's decision. Ethan turned back to Rethos, who gave him a respectful nod. For the first time since arriving on this planet, Ethan felt like he belonged. But then Silera spoke again. "There is still one final trial." Ethan sighed. "Of course there is." Ethan had barely recovered from his last test when Queen Silera led him to another chamber deep within the royal palace. The dimly lit corridors stretched endlessly, lined with intricate carvings of ancient Silari history. Each step he took felt heavier than the last. The air inside the new chamber was thick with anticipation. High-ranking nobles and warriors stood in a circle, whispering amongst themselves. At the center of the room was a tall stone platform, glowing with a strange blue light. Ethan glanced at Silera. "So what now? Another duel? Or do I have to arm wrestle a giant lizard?" Silera smirked. "No, Ethan. This is your final trial, one that no outsider has ever faced." Ethan crossed his arms. "You really enjoy keeping me in suspense, don't you?" Silera gestured toward the platform. "Step forward. This will determine your true place among us. A trial of the mind." Ethan cautiously approached the platform. The moment he stepped onto it, the glowing blue light intensified, wrapping around him like a soft mist. A deep humming sound filled the chamber. A figure stepped forward, an elderly Zilari, draped in ceremonial robes. His piercing silver eyes locked onto Ethan. "This is the memory ritual," the elder announced. "It will allow us to see into your heart, your thoughts, your intentions. If you are worthy, the truth will reveal itself." Ethan tensed. "Wait, you're going to read my mind?" Silera nodded. "Not in the way you think. The platform will project your strongest memories, your past, your fears, your dreams." Ethan swallowed hard. "Great. No pressure at all." The elder raised his hands, and the blue mist around Ethan swirled faster. Suddenly, images flickered in the air, hazy at first, then clearer. A small boy sitting under the night sky, staring at the stars. It was him, a younger version of himself. He saw his childhood home, his father's old telescope, the nights he spent wondering if life existed beyond Earth. Then the images changed. His family, his mother's worried face when he left for his first deep space mission, his father's proud smile. Then, chaos. A broken ship, a desperate fight for survival. The moment he crash-landed on Silera's world. The nobles watched in silence. And then, a different memory surfaced. His feelings for Silera. Ethan's eyes widened as an image formed, a moment he hadn't fully acknowledged. The way he had looked at Silera when she defended him. The way his heart had raced when she spoke. The room was silent. Silera's golden eyes locked onto his, unreadable. Ethan's face burned. Great. Now everyone knows. The verdict. The blue mist slowly faded. The elder took a deep breath and turned to Silera. "He is not a warrior by birth," the elder said, "but he carries the spirit of one." A murmur spread through the nobles. The elder continued. "His heart is strong. His loyalty is genuine. He has already begun to change the way of things." Ethan exhaled. That sounded positive. Silera stepped forward. "Then it is decided." She turned to the gathered nobles. "From this day forward, Ethan Carter is no longer an outsider. He is one of us." Some nobles nodded in agreement, Others looked uncertain, but no one objected. Varrock clenched his jaw, but bowed slightly. The Queen has spoken. Ethan let out a nervous chuckle. So, does this mean I don't have to fight anyone else? Silara smirked. It means you now have a place here, and her expression softened slightly. It means we have much to discuss. Ethan blinked. Wait, does this also mean? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned, motioning for him to follow. Ethan sighed. Yep, more surprises ahead. But this time, he didn't mind. Because, for the first time since landing on this planet, he finally felt like he belonged. Ethan followed Queen Silara down the long corridors of the palace, his mind still spinning from the memory ritual. He had just proven himself to the Zilari people, but he had also unknowingly revealed his feelings for Xilara in front of everyone. He stole a glance at her. She walked with her usual confidence, her golden armor shining under the palace lights. If she had any thoughts about what she saw during the ritual, she wasn't showing them. Ethan cleared his throat. So, now that I'm officially one of you, what happens next? Do I get a crown? Maybe a special handshake? Silara smirked but didn't stop walking. You are not a king, Ethan, but you are something much more important. He raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what's that? She stopped in front of a massive stone door. With a wave of her hand, the doors rumbled open, revealing a vast council chamber inside. Inside, Zilari leaders, warriors, and nobles stood waiting. Their expressions were serious. At the center of the room was a large holographic map showing different planets and space routes. Ethan felt a chill. Something big was happening. A war approaches. An elder warrior named Varrock stepped forward. He was one of the nobles who had originally doubted Ethan, but now his face was grim. We have received word from our scouts, Varrock said. The Draveri Empire has begun its invasion. The room tensed. Ethan frowned. The Draveri. Who are they? Silara's jaw tightened. Our oldest enemies, a race of conquerors who have already taken over 3 neighboring star systems. A warrior stepped forward. They demand our surrender, or they will destroy our cities. Ethan's stomach sank. He knew exactly how this kind of enemy worked. Let me guess, he said. They don't actually want peace. If you surrender, they'll take control and wipe out anyone who resists. Silara nodded. That is why we must fight. Ethan looked at the holographic display. The Draveri fleet was huge, outnumbering the Zilari forces by nearly 3-1. This isn't a fight, Ethan muttered. It's a massacre. The nobles murmured in agreement. Some looked at Silara, waiting for her decision. She turned to Ethan. You have spent your life in space. You have seen battles. If you were in my place, what would you do? Ethan blinked. Wait, you actually want my opinion? She nodded. You proved your worth in the trials. Now prove it here. Ethan took a deep breath. His mind raced. If the Zilari fought the Draveri head-on, they would lose. The enemy was too strong. But Ethan had seen how human forces survived against impossible odds before. They had used tactics, strategy, creativity, and that gave him an idea. A plan like no other. Ethan stepped forward and pointed at the holographic map. If you fight them directly, you'll lose, he said. But if we fight smart, we might just have a chance. The nobles leaned in, listening. The Draveri have numbers, but they're arrogant, Ethan explained. They expect you to meet them in open battle. So we don't. Varrock crossed his arms. Then what do you suggest? Ethan grinned. We turn their own strength against them, lure them in, trap them, and hit them where it hurts. He pointed to a large asteroid belt near the Zilari homeworld. We use this, hide our best ships here, and make it look like the planet is undefended. When they move in for the kill, we ambush them from all sides. The nobles exchanged uncertain glances. This is madness, one of them muttered. No Zilari commander has ever used such dishonorable tactics. Ethan sighed. Honor won't save your people. Victory will. Silara studied him for a moment, then turned to the others. I believe he is right. The nobles fell silent. Even Vervak looked thoughtful. Finally, after a long pause, he gave a slow nod. Very well. We will fight like humans. The night before battle, the council adjourned, and preparations began immediately. Warriors armed themselves. Fleets were repositioned. The asteroid belt was turned into a deadly trap. Ethan stood on one of the palace balconies, watching the planet below. The weight of what was coming pressed heavily on his chest. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a Zilari. And yet, their survival depended on him. A soft voice broke his thoughts. You are troubled. Ethan turned to see Silara standing beside him, her golden eyes watching him closely. He chuckled. You mean besides the fact that I might get all of us killed tomorrow? She stepped closer. I have never trusted an outsider before. But I trust you. Ethan felt his heart skip. Did she really mean that? She placed a hand on his shoulder. Tomorrow, we fight as one. He nodded, and we win as one. A small smile played on Silara's lips. For the first time since he had arrived on this planet, he saw something new in her eyes. Not just trust, but something more. The night was thick with tension. Ethan stood at the command center, staring at the holographic map of the battlefield. The asteroid belt was now alive with movement. Zilari ships had hidden in the rocks, ready to spring their trap. The Draveri fleet was on its way, unaware of the trap waiting for them. Silara stood beside him, her eyes scanning the map. Everything is in place, she said, her voice steady, though there was a trace of uncertainty beneath it. Ethan nodded, his fingers tapping nervously on the console. We've got one shot at this. Silara met his gaze, and we will take it. The countdown had begun. 1,000 ships waited in the shadows of the asteroids, ready to pounce. Ethan felt the weight of their trust on his shoulders. It wasn't just his survival that depended on this plan. It was the future of an entire people. The Draveri attack. The Draveri ships finally arrived, their massive fleet emerging from the depths of space. The Zilari ships stayed silent, hidden in the belt. The Draveri didn't notice. They were too sure of their victory. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the enemy fleet move closer. They had taken the bait. Now, all he had to do was wait. Then the signal came. Now. Silara's voice rang through the command center. The Zilari ships flared to life. Weapons fired from every direction. The Draveri, caught by surprise, were thrown into chaos. Ethan's breath caught as explosions rocked the battlefield. The Draveri ships scattered, trying to regroup, but it was too late. The Zilari were everywhere, coming from every angle, hitting the Draveri from all sides. Ethan's mind raced. He had to keep them on track. Target their weak points, he called out. Go for their engines, disable them. The Zilari fleet moved with precision, guided by his tactics. They worked in perfect harmony, every ship striking at the heart of the Draveri fleet. Ethan could see it on the screen. The Draveri were panicking, their formations crumbling as more and more ships were taken out. But the battle was far from won. A twist of fate. Just as victory seemed within reach, a new Draveri warship appeared on the edge of the battle. It was massive, larger than anything Ethan had seen, its guns powerful enough to wipe out fleets with a single blast. The Zilari ships hesitated, giving the new threat a moment to make its move. Ethan's eyes widened. They'll destroy us all if we don't stop it. Silara's voice came through the communicator. We will not let them. Trust me. Ethan didn't have time to question her words. The Draveri warship fired. A massive energy beam tore through the asteroid belt, cutting through the Zilari ships like they were paper. Ethan's heart sank as he watched several ships disintegrate in a flash of light. We have to fight back. Ethan shouted. Get everyone to focus on that warship. It's our only chance. The final stand. The Zilari fleet, though battered, responded. They moved as one, racing toward the Draveri warship, dodging blasts and narrowly avoiding destruction. Ethan's mind raced with the strategy he had formulated. He knew they had to get close enough to disable the warship's shields before it could fire again. He glanced at Zilara. "We need to board that ship." Zilara's gaze was fierce. "We will." With a single command, the Zilari fleet moved in. The Draveri warship, sensing the danger, opened fire, but the Zilari ships were too fast. They darted and weaved, creating a flurry of movement that made the Draveri guns miss. Finally, after what felt like hours, they were close enough. Ethan's heart was in his throat as he watched the Zilari boarding pods launch toward the warship. He had done his part. Now, the ground forces would finish it. The victory. Ethan watched the battle unfold from the command center. The Zilari warriors stormed the Draveri warship, their weapons cutting through the enemy lines. The Draveri, overwhelmed by the sudden assault, began to retreat. Then, there was silence. Ethan's fingers clenched around the console. Had they won? "Status report," he ordered. A Zilari officer turned to him, eyes wide with shock. "We did it. The Draveri have retreated. We've won." The command center erupted into cheers. Zilara's voice came through the comms. "Ethan, we did it." Ethan couldn't help but smile. "No, we did it." The battle had been won, but more than that, the Zilari had proven their strength, not through brute force, but through strategy and unity. Zilara approached him, her eyes glowing with pride. "You saved us, Ethan." Ethan shook his head. "We saved each other." He had come to this planet as a stranger. He had faced a new world, a new culture, and a new kind of warfare. But through it all, he had found something he never expected, a purpose, and maybe even more than that, he had found a place to belong. The war was far from over, but now, with the Draveri retreating, the Zilari had hope. And Ethan, the outsider, had become more than a soldier. He had become a hero, a symbol of what could be achieved when different worlds came together for a common cause. As the battle stars faded in the sky above them, one thing was certain: the future was theirs.